Welcome to the Near Memo, a weekly conversation about search, social, and commerce. What happened, why it matters, and the implications for local. So why don't we segue into my item here, the final one today, which is kind of a related topic about, are any of these new search initiatives, and there was another one this week in the form of a search assistant chatbot style search engine called Andi, A-N-D-I. The URL is andisearch.com, I believe. And that was a kind of an interesting one that we'll talk about. But there's a lot of activity now in search where there hasn't been, there was a period of doldrums where nothing was going on beyond Google. And we have Neeva, and we have Brave, and we have Yep, and we have Apple, and they're probably
is Bing still around?
Of course.
Good question.
Yeah, that was
I don't see it very often in Google Analytics today.
Well, we could argue. So what's interesting is, are any of these initiatives going to have any impact on Google? And then, of course, we talked about TikTok quite a bit, and younger people, according to Google, defecting to TikTok for certain kinds of queries around restaurants, possibly travel, and certain other kinds of categories. So the totality of these things, is this going to matter? Is it going to, is it, I think before we started the call, David, I think you referred to it as death by 1,000 cuts. Is that what's going on? Or are these just all a bunch of ankle biters that aren't going to have any kind of impact? And search will continue to be defined by Google into the first, unforeseeable future.
At the meta level, that VCs are investing in this, people perceive that there is some opportunity. What that ultimately looks like in the absence of control of a platform, I don't know. Apple controlling the phone has the best chance to provide an alternative. Facebook is another. Neither have shown much success. Apple is further along than Facebook.
Yeah, Facebook's not doing anything.
Right. And then beyond that, it becomes very difficult to get the exposure you need, to get the volume you need to improve as much as you need to improve to make these things work. You need to understand what people are searching for, how they're searching, and then update your results as a byproduct of that. And it requires volume. So no matter how good something like the Ahrefs search engine is, how do you get the volume? Well, but there are a lot of them.
I want to challenge something you just said, because I'm not sure it's true. You said that VCs are investing money in search. I'm not sure that that's actually true. There may be some money invested in Neeva. I think there is, because the CEO of Neeva is formerly the head of search for Google. And so, that kind of visibility and credibility may have gotten some investment.
Well, then let me rephrase it. That some VC, but entrepreneurs see an opportunity, right?
Yeah.
So a risk assessment that there is a perception in the marketplace that there is a chance.
One of the antitrust arguments against Google is that they have shut down investment in certain categories because nobody perceives the ability to compete there, right? Search being the most prominent one. But let's talk about TikTok and this Andi search. You guys hated it. It's a chatbot style search assistant where you type in a query. Looks like
a strong word.
It wasn't okay.
It wasn't my preferred user. It wasn't my preferred user experience for a search by any stretch.
But it's different. I thought what was interesting about it was that the results. You have the search box on the left, and then you get a sort of a vertical scrolling kind of graphical presentation with some images and text of the results. It's not links that you then click through to see what the story is. You can sort of surmise that from the results. And I thought that the UI was pretty interesting and potentially appealing to some people.
Firstly, I have this really sore spot for chats. It's like I hate going to a chat on a website and then waiting, or then struggling to find which screen the chat is on, or having the chat never come on, or then having to leave and not be able to continue the chat. So the whole metaphor of chatting on the web has been problematic for me in the past. But this implementation, while potentially visually interesting, even though it implied that there was a potential chat possibility, it never delivered that. It was a very linear, I do a search, it gives me a result. It wasn't, oh, Mike, here are 3 alternatives you might want to try to find something closer.
Right. It's not refining. It's not helping you refine the query, right? You could imagine a back and forth where you start with a sort of a generic or high level query, and then it helps you refine, and then you get to some specific result. But in fairness to the company, which I don't really know anything about, it seems like it's a pretty small startup. They characterize it as a fairly stable alpha. So it's a very new product, and they're looking, I guess, to get, this is an MVP. They want to get feedback and see how people use it. And I just think it's interesting because it departs from the traditional Google style search results, which everybody has copied to one degree or another. DuckDuckGo uses it, Bing uses it. And I don't think that's a way to compete against Google. If you're just doing the not as good version of what Google is doing, I don't think anybody's going to care about what you're doing. You have to do something different. And I think this is an interesting, we talked about BlenderBot, which was the Facebook chatbot, which, became sort of racist, homophobic, and, right wing very quickly. But that's I said at the time that was kind of an interesting alternative, that people who are used to texting and chatting a lot, for whom that's their preferred kind of way of interacting, might find compelling.
Well, I could see this use case being interesting exposed through an API where you're in iMessage and you hit the app and you're asking it a question, that sort of thing, or just an SMS to a certain number that returns a set of results. Like that kind of thing is potentially interesting. It, from a web experience, as Mike was saying, like going to a browser to get into a chat window just seems like a bit of a stretch to me. So.
Yeah, well, so kind of before we go, just a final point about TikTok. I mean, Mike, you discovered Google integrating TikTok results into mobile search, the mobile SERP for, I think the query was breakfast NYC. But it was really far down the page. It was giving you sort of videos of different restaurants, but it was buried essentially.
It was. I'm going to show it real quickly because I think that the value of it is in the presentation. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
All right.
If we're watching on YouTube, yes. Those on a podcast will not be able to see the screen. So we'll have to
so I have, as Greg pointed out, scrolled very far down the screen. But when I get to this breakfast in New York City TikTok search, it's a carousel with 3 full moving videos. They're actually very active. So it ends up being very, very eye-catching. This isn't a normal static search. It's very active. And you
by video, these are effectively animated GIFs, however. These are not sort of...
Well, yes. It's more... Yeah. And it's more than 3. It looks like you can scroll to the right, and it looks like there are 5 or 6 or more.
That's right. There's, I think, 6, 7, 8.
Keeps going.
I don't know. They keep going, right? They're stopped there. But each of these is animated, and it's just fascinating that it is so dynamic. So this speaks to, one, it's very far down the page. Clearly, they have not optimized. This speaks to David's point last week or 2 weeks ago that TikTok has not done a good job of optimization. It's pretty far down the page. I mean,
they haven't even made an attempt to build a sort of classic Yelp style directory, which again just strikes me as mind blowing that somebody inside of some senior growth person inside of TikTok either doesn't recognize or hasn't been able to effectively make the case that we could steal tens of millions of eyeballs from Google search every single month. And given that their model, Greg, as you've said, is largely display advertising, theoretically, eyeballs are what they care about the most. So
it may be a big initiative for them that they're not used to thinking of themselves as a search engine, even though they're starting to think in those terms, I think. So it may be coming at some point, but they may be sort of too fat and happy with their existing revenues to sort of configure things. And there's also the question of TikTok is owned by ByteDance, which is a Chinese company, and we don't know what sort of approvals need to be made for different kinds of initiatives. So they may have limited authority to do anything radically different than what the parent is doing, or they may be autonomous in terms of the product direction. I don't really know the answer to that. Sort of two quick points about TikTok. One is, it's really all about discovery right now, not search. And so that's part of the appeal, is that you don't know what's coming. And if you're following a bunch of people, you sort of know, but there's always sort of new content. And so there's a kind of serendipitous dimension to it, although people do use it to find things to some degree. So that there's that, which is a different use case. Although Google does offer local discovery to some degree on its Discover feed. And then, oh my God, I'm having a senior moment here.
I resemble that remark.
Yes. Expletive. God. All right. I've forgotten the second point I was going to make. That's really embarrassing.
Stay tuned for episode 83.
Yeah. 80 what? What number? No, it's interesting because I know what I was going to say. One of the interesting things right now is that there's too much information. Google overtook Yahoo years and years ago when the web exploded and there was just enormous volume of content. And so Google had developed a method to reliably rank and present that information. It was no longer susceptible to human curation, the Yahoo directory being the metaphor for that. And now we have the opposite problem. There's just too much information and too much junk online, which is part of the helpful content update rationale. And so I don't think people care about comprehensiveness. I think people want, really relevant information. Show me 3 links, to your point about Apple search. 3 links is fine if they're good links. I don't need to see 20. And so I think we're in a kind of a different environment now from a search standpoint, and there's some interesting opportunities. You don't have to have the biggest index now, I think, to do something really interesting. And so TikTok, with a smaller number of results, or Apple search with a smaller number of results, might be in a position to steal some usage.
I would contend that in local search, there is a need for relevance plus truth as opposed to truthiness that Google approaches, right? Spam results are a good example. They're very relevant. They're just deceptive and dishonest. And Google has never made the commitment to truth in local. And I think that the company that will win in local has to take that next step, that it's beyond relevance. It's relevance plus accuracy. And so,
well, I mean, it's
a big problem and it's hard to solve.
One of the things that people say about TikTok is that it offers more authenticity than Google in certain categories. Now, I'm not sure that that's 100% true, but you get the sense of authenticity because you're seeing people talk about things. You're seeing real people showing you something. And so there's a kind of a sense that you're getting something more authentic than a review, which may be fraudulent, or some static description, which may have been written by some machine or something like that. So it's an interesting time. I mean, this is an interesting time again in search, where we went through a decade where nothing was happening pretty much other than Google. So that brings us to the conclusion of another exciting episode. For the next roughly month, I think Mike is on vacation. He's speaking at the Synda conference in Florence, Italy. Let's feel bad for Mike for that. And then you're taking a bike trip.
The world's tiniest violin on the banks of the Old Toronto, Mike.
Yes.
A bike trip from Newcastle to Edinburgh, and then exploring Portugal, and then exploring Florence area. So
that's a great trip. But Mike will be gone for the next month, and we will maybe take a couple of breaks, but also fill in with some guests that should be interesting. So please stay with us. Subscribe and tell your friends about the Near Media newsletter. And have a great week.
Thanks for joining David, Mike, and Greg. To stay on top of the latest developments in local, subscribe to our newsletter at nearmedia.co. We'll see you next week.